All right, last week, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that the Department of Justice would be redirecting resources in order to, quote, meet the challenges of the current moment, end quote. That is, the election reform efforts that states have been working on since the November election. The Attorney General pledged to double in the next 30 days the size of the enforcement staff at the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, alleging that the right to vote needs to be protected and reiterating the left's talking points that the new voting laws passed in more than a dozen states so far, quote, make it harder to vote. Well, thankfully, there are state leaders that aren't buying this stuff. In fact, they're calling it out for what it is. Joining me now to talk more about this is one of the attorney generals from the states that is representing a state that has actually passed reform efforts, and he's not playing games. Joining me now, Attorney General Mark Brnovich from Arizona. Attorney General, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for having me on.
Now, I read your letter. You sent a letter last week to the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and I like what you had to say. You said this letter appeared, well, let me just go to the second paragraph. You talked about, my office is not amused at the DOJ's posturing and will not tolerate any effort to undermine or interfere with our state Senate audit to reassure Arizonans of the accuracy of our elections. We stand ready to defend federalism and state sovereignty against any partisan attacks or federal overreach. What is the U.S. Department of Justice trying to do, and what are you prepared to do?
First and foremost, Tony, one of the things that all people of faith have to realize is that the Biden administration is radically changing the government by trying to concentrate powers in Washington, D.C., because they want to control our livelihoods, our lives, and that ultimately will undermine all of our religious liberties. So what the Department of Justice is claiming to do is they're claiming that they're going to use the Civil Rights Division, and they're going to start looking at states like Arizona or other states that are passing these common sense election integrity measures and scrutinize them under the guise of trying to protect civil rights. But the reality is that it's clearly an overreach on the part of the federal government. And we all need to be cognizant and recognize that whether it's dealing with tax and spend policies, whether it's trying to dictate to us in our personal lives, or whether now it's trying to control state elections, you have an attempt by the radical left to change this country. And it's changing it through this concentration of power and creating a dependence on Washington, D.C. So I've already been involved, Tony, in numerous cases. In fact, there's a case right now pending at the U.S. Supreme Court called Brnovich v. DNC, Brnovich v. DNC. It's named after me. I personally argued at the U.S. Supreme Court because left-wing groups came in and tried to undermine our election integrity measures, our restrictions on, political parties and candidates engaging in mass ballot harvesting, restrictions on out-of-state precinct voting, things that are common sense measures that a majority of states have. And yet now the left is trying to portray those as somehow racist or disenfranchising people. And the reality is it's just the opposite, Tony. What these common sense measures do, not only here in Arizona but other places, they're consistent with the Constitution on time, place, and manner restrictions on elections. But more importantly, they allow people to have confidence that when they go into the ballot box, when they go to send their ballot in, when they vote, that every vote will be counted and no votes that are fraudulent or phony will be counted. So we want to make sure that everyone has confidence in the election process, and that means having common sense election integrity measures. And I've literally fought all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court on this issue.
It is so critical. And it's so critical that people know that you're doing it because they are discouraged by what the reports that came out of the November election. They know something was not right. It was widespread across the country, and states, in fact, 47 states, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 48, have election reform measures in some form or fashion in their state legislatures. And that is to reassure people, just as you said, that your vote counts, that it's not going to be corrupted or you're not going to be disenfranchised. And the left doesn't want people to be hopeful and encouraged that their state elected officials are fighting this. Now, you also took, I think, the Attorney General to school here. In your letter, you said it's important to remember that states created the federal government, not the other way around. That's a good history lesson. It's a good civics lesson for all Americans to remember.
We especially need to remember that, Tony, because now there's this attempt through, critical race theory, the 1619 Project, to fundamentally alter or undermine people's understanding, especially young people, my daughters and, these younger generations understanding of our history. I'm fortunate because our kids went to a charter school and they read the Federalist Papers. They understand that this was a nation conceived in liberty. It was conceived in this idea about the separation of powers and the Constitution being the supreme law of the land. So it is important for people to remember that, and especially important for people like me to push back against the federal government when they try to nationalize every single issue.
It is absolutely important, and we are so grateful, Attorney General Brnovich, that you are doing that. And we applaud you, and we are grateful that there are others joining with you to do just that, because it is the final line of defense against an overreaching federal government. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much.
All right.